It's not every day that a game like Xenoblade Chronicles exists. It has taken me 6 to 7 times to try to actually sit down, commit to this game, and actually see it through to its end. And I owe every single Xenoblade Chronicles fan an apology for thinking that this game was going to be too long, too complex, too difficult, too anything. Just locking in and committing, it's a top 10 game of all time for me. It really is. And here's why. Xenoblade Chronicles ended up becoming one of the coziest games I've ever played. I ended up clocking around 36 hours on this, and while I know that's probably going to be on the shorter end for many of you diehard Xenoblade Chronicles fans, I have to say that 36 hours was a sweet spot for me. I played it sometimes for 3 hours, sometimes for 1 hour, sometimes for 15 minutes, but I was always feeling like I was progressing towards something and progressing towards a goal. I did not do any side quests. I was level 72 when the game finished, and I played on casual. And that's partly why I didn't stream it, because I felt like a game like Xenoblade Chronicles and its successors, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and 3, are games that should be digested at one's own pace. In the end, I think I fell in love with these characters more than I have with any game in the last few years. Even Claire Obscura, which I loved, was meaningful, but I don't think I quite locked in with the characters as much as I did with Xenoblade Chronicles. Shulk, Reyn, Dumban, Sharla, Fiora, I fell in love with this cast. And the twists and turns were really the thing that surprised me the most, because no matter where I went, the story was constantly changing. And that is something that I don't think you can really, and I don't want to spoil it because you never know who's going to watch a video like this, but I can't help but feel like every time I thought I knew what was happening, suddenly something else was happening. And I think that was the magic of it, is that I was like, okay, cool, yeah, I got to the part with Melia. Melia is really important to the plot. And then all of a sudden, we flip. It's just crazy. There were multiple times that I've started the game and usually stopped right after you meet Sharla. Or there's been 2 other times where I stopped right when you meet Melia, when you're at the Nopon village, Nopon Kingdom, or for the forest area. And then I just never continued. But I don't know what came over me, but I just was like, you know what? I'm gonna lock in. And boy, I just am so satisfied I did. Like I said, this became a comfort cozy game for me. It is the definition of like an incredible JRPG. As a person who grew up with the Final Fantasy series, I always thought that Final Fantasy was the peak and that there was no way that anything could possibly come up and knock on the door. But Xenoblade Chronicles is probably, to me, as good as Final Fantasy IX. Final Fantasy IX edging it out slightly just because of that extra nostalgia factor. Another point that I think is actually really interesting that I think for some may be a turnoff is the combat. I actually ended up falling in love with the combat, and while I felt that I was at times a little underleveled for some of the boss fights that required a little bit of focus on ads, I ended up finding that as an MMO player, that I really took to the combat, and I enjoyed the simplicity of working on the, topple, break, stun mechanics, or as I like to think about them mentally, pink, green, olive, backstab, exclamation point, chain attack, rinse and repeat. I don't know how many times I did that with these bosses where I literally just constantly had them in a topple in a dazed state, and then I just kind of wailed on them, and I literally, for the fight, for any of the fights that did not have ads, I literally just abused and exploited the system and just sat there listening to whatever song was playing. There were multiple boss fights where I did that. The main one that I really felt kind of bad for exploiting this system, because on casual it was just a little bit straightforward, was the fight with Dixon. By that point I really understood what I was doing, and I just was like, you know what? I'm here for the story, let me ride the wave. And I think that's really the beautiful thing about this game. The story is really so fine and so it's just delicious. And I couldn't help myself. I just couldn't wait to see what happened next. And sometimes, with stories like this, you kind of feel like, oh, maybe I'll watch it on YouTube as like a movie compilation or something and watch all the cutscenes. I had to know what happened. And gosh, the twists and turns were absolutely insane. And I don't even want to get into it because it's so complicated. But there were 3 tracks while I was playing. Now, of course, this doesn't include the world themes, which, by the way, the world themes make this game feel so expansive and so much bigger than it already is. I mean, the vistas and the plains, and seeing this, Monolith Soft has this crazy ability of making these worlds just feel so massive and so gigantic, and you feel so small. It reminds me of the paintings of Caspar David Friedrich. I don't know if you've ever seen those, but these paintings are usually man versus nature, and I have to say that you really did get the sense of scale both between the Bionis and the Mechonis when walking around. I mean, it was always amazing to figure out, especially when you entered into a new area, what part of the Bionis you were in. And then, the Mechonis parts were different, of course, and obviously they were all inside the Mechonis for the most part, and that was really interesting. But also that the section where you end up on the ground, where the hand is like sitting there after it had been cut off from the original battle, and you're just like climbing around it. I was always so in awe of the sense of scale. But despite the sense of scale, there are 3 songs that I think really stood out to me as some of my favorites and the most intimate. No conversation around Xenoblade Chronicles can be complete without talking about the divinity of Engage the Enemy. Engage the Enemy is a piece that is so emblematic of every key moment in the game, in the story, that you can't help but just feel like a real palpable connection to it as you progress. And it starts at that first encounter with Metalface and Fiora, when we return to the colony and have that first experience with the Mechon invading and causing and wreaking havoc all throughout Bionis. But that particular guitar wail, then it pulls back and there's this piano, and it's all about like clarity and coming to an understanding of like the circumstances at play and how you need to find it within yourself to bury the hatchet and really be steadfast in your courage and commitment to seeing this thing through. There are so many other instances where you get a big reveal, or you understand what the Mechons are, or you see Mumkar, or you experience a conversation with Dumban, really becoming the older brother in this protector role, or of course other instances later in the game where you can't help but feel like, oh my god. And then what's amazing is that as you progress through these moments, the song also shifts and morphs, and so you'll have the beginning part with the electric guitar and the power, and the action, but then it pulls back and you're left with that beautiful vocal part and that really sharp rhythm. Bum, beam, bum, 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 beam, bum, bum. It just is so divine, and I'm trying to think, but I don't think I've ever really played a video game where there was one very, 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 very strong and important melody that only existed in one specific part of the game each and every time. And I think that's extraordinary, because that like, oh my god, wait, what? And all of a sudden the light switch flicks and you're left with that sound of Engage the Enemy. You're left with the moment of like, oh my god, what is happening? And Engage the Enemy is not just for the player characters, it's also for you as a player. Because you're like, what do you mean that's what's going on? And then you're watching Shulk try to process this, and all of a sudden, he's giving in to his, he wants to kill so-and-so, and he wants to, he's accepting his fate, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my god, yes, you have to go and do this, and there's this constant shift of the, flipping of the script. The paradigm shift thing in this game is really cool, and it's a trope that I've come to love in media, where everything we think we know isn't what we know. And of course, we get that in a big way in this particular game. But Engage the Enemy is, at this point, one of my top 10. Not only is the game in my top 10 list, but I also think that Engage the Enemy at this point is in my top 10 songs list. It is just divine. And I was talking earlier about size and scale, and how a lot of the overworld themes like Gwawer Plains, Satori Marsh, I believe that's what it's called, Prison Island, but then there's also the area around Prison Island at night that was so stunning. Pardon me for not remembering all the names, I'm just sort of talking off the cuff here. Even though we have this these vibrant strings, and everything feels really large because it's very layered, which I think gives way to scale and size. So everything feels like it's on that Z-axis axis where, you can see the tips of the Bionis arm or leg or kneecap or whatever, and then you feel really small, but so the sense of scale is amazing even in the music because of that layering and that verticality within the actual like Ace writing. On top of that is the intimacy. Now, Engage the Enemy has a degree of intimacy, sure, but Shulk and Fiora is one of my favorite themes because of how tender and innocent it is, and also how pared back it is. It starts with that very, very simple violin, ba-da-dee. I love this song in particular because it feels immensely personal. String quartet, maybe a couple more instruments, plus the piano. There's obviously, then we get that flute later on, I believe. It takes from the main melody, the main menu motif, and then expands, and it has that thing of like, in the music there's a knowing quality, It's like you look at someone and you say, yep, I really get it. I get you. I understand. No, it's okay. It's that tenderness, that softness, and none of the romance in this game is altogether too in your face. There's a bit of distance between these characters, like it's awkward, they're young, especially with Shulk and Fiora. There's this sort of inherent innocence in that. I don't remember that we necessarily hear this song when Reyn is talking with Sharla, but even that character development that Reyn has, when you see what happens with her and her relationship, Reyn does a lot of growing up, actually, even though he never loses that sense of that essence of adventurousness, a little bit kind of clumsy, and he rallies behind Sharla, and he goes, oh, there's an ownership of himself and also an ownership of the circumstances, and also just like a general respect for Sharla that is so beautiful. And I don't recall if this theme also plays for instances with them, but here Shulk and Fiora have this inherent innocence, and that innocence kind of plays out through this piece of music as we listen to it. It starts up in the upper register, and all of that is inherent to the idea that no matter how big this world is, the interpersonal relationships are still the most important part. That's the most beautiful part about it. And it's interesting too, because when we look at the main theme, it's interesting. I've presented this main theme to non-gamers before, and some have claimed that it's a little simple. In reality, I actually think that simplicity on the main menu is vitally important, because the simplicity gives way to the grandiosity. If we started with a bangin' main menu track, all of a sudden we're thrust into this circumstance that is huge, but it's actually a pretty intimate circumstance. Yes, everything that happens in Xenoblade Chronicles affects everyone on Bionis and on Mechonis, right? But it's actually a very small, personal story about life, about making choices, about committing to yourself, about honoring your life, about honoring your friendships, about honoring your loves, about honoring who you are, ultimately. And there's nuance and subtlety within that, but at the end of the day, even the main theme is not loud. It is not a scream. The main theme is personal, it's intimate. And it repeats because it wants to set across this idea that, like, hey, no matter what happens, no matter how much of a god you may become, no matter how much of your life unfolds and unfurls and becomes different, you're still you. You can still look to the brightness of the future. And I think that's ultimately why Xenoblade Chronicles really hit home for me, because it's about hope. It's hope core. It's a video game about possibility, about choice, about taking action, about not letting things happen to you, but letting them happen for you. It's about trusting your instincts. It's about not changing who you are at its core. Now, of course, changes occur within it, naturally, but it's just... I'm really sorry I didn't give it the flowers it deserved. I'm really sorry I didn't give it the chance it deserved, especially when I played it those times. But now, looking back on it, having experienced that time with these characters, I really didn't want it to end. It's rare that I fall into a cozy game experience where it's a game that I like ending games. I like committing to games and locking in and finishing them. But this one, no matter when I was playing it, whether it was in bed or on the couch or at my mother's house while I was hanging out or whatever, this game just felt like it was taking me along with it. And it was beautiful from start to finish. It just was. It's pristine. You know, I hate to sit here and just like, you know, prop it up, but you gotta understand, here's a game that I really didn't commit to until I finally committed to it. And I'm so grateful that I did. There's so much good music in Xenoblade Chronicles. What's crazy is that it feels deeply underrated because it's locked away on the Nintendo platform, but it actually, if it was mainstream, people would devour it. And I think that's interesting too, that the fan base for Xenoblade Chronicles is rabid, loves this game so much, and for good reason, but they're still kind of small when you consider how vast and wide the world of video game enjoyers actually is and how many RPG enjoyers there are. It's great. It's so great. And if you haven't played it and you've watched this video, may I encourage you to just commit to it. Just find a way to play it. Pick yourself up a Nintendo Switch, ideally too. The boost mode helps, but boy, it would be really nice if we could get that 60 FPS update on Xenoblade Chronicles games. It's just amazing. The fact that this was also on the 3DS is mind-boggling to me. Just what a game. I don't have anything bad to say about it. An amazing experience, really. Maybe the only thing I could say that's negative is that you always had to just go from point A to point B and just follow the trail. And it felt kind of like empty at times because all that's out there is enemies you can fight. But that's the thing, you could go and collect these collectibles to then give you items to help you play the game better. You know, you could level up and fight super bosses. Like there's a reason for all of that space. I chose not to engage with it, so that's on me, but that's not really even a negative. So if you've never played Xenoblade Chronicles and you've watched this video, please do. Please do. Thanks.